In this video, we will discuss how to set up your SiteLink program. To do so, you're going to go to Company and then Setup. For many customers, you're at the point where you've already had your tenants and your units brought into the software already, regardless of whether or not you are a brand new facility with no units entered from a previous software, or if you're converting from a previous software, you will want to review this screen. The first button is site information. In here, you want to fill in all of the primary fields, which are in green: your store name, what you're doing business as, your store address, your city, state, and zip or postal code, and phone number and fax. If you don't have a fax, put in the same phone number. We have options in terms of what your business hours are on the right hand side. You normally don't need to focus on the store location. We do have an option in the report section of SiteLink to use a map function, a Google map showing where your facility is located in your city or town. If your facility is not showing correctly on that map, then click the button that says update longitude and latitude from your address. Click OK to save the changes. The next button is Program Defaults. The Program Defaults screen has a lot of different options. None of the options are right or wrong. They're all choices that you can make. Know that with your setup, even though the majority of the time when you have something set up, you're going to keep that setting for an extended period of time, know that you can certainly come back and change a setting at any point in time if you have the right to do so within the setup. The first option in the General tab is your gate defaults in terms of your time zone and keypad zone. Typically, you would have either 24-hour access or business hour time zone choices. Think about what the majority of your customers are going to have for a time zone. For example, business hours, choose that. Most facilities, if you have a gate, you have one gate that acts as the in and out for the facility. Leave all keypads. If you have more than one gate, you can create keypads in the gate setup of the setup screen to come and choose what your default keypad zone is. Minimum balance before a gate lockout. Ask yourself the question, should someone be locked out of the gate if they owe a penny? For many facilities, the answer is yes. So if that's the case, put your minimum balance as 0. If there's a certain balance that you feel is reasonable that a customer should owe in order to be locked out of the gate, let's say $5 or $10, you can put that amount here. For tax defaults, if you have one tax rate, then put that under tax 1 and put your tax due value as 0. Some facilities have a tax rate for their rent and then another tax rate for their point of sale or merchandise items. If that's the case, put the merchandise tax in tax 2. Some areas, for example in Canada, depending on your province, may have a federal tax rate and a provincial. If that's the case, put those respective amounts in tax 1 and tax 2. Most customers for charge rounding are going to have it as 0, but in Canada, again, where they do not have the penny any longer, some facilities in Canada put the charge rounding to be a nickel. For the security logon, require the user to log on each time any of the following buttons is clicked: move in, payments, transfer, move out, credit cards, ledger edit, NSF checks, leads. If you are a facility that wants to be prompted every time you take a payment, for example, to log in, then check this. If not, uncheck it. So for example, if you have one computer at your facility but you have multiple people working that computer, that may be an instance where you would want to have this checked so that you can be confident that a payment was taken by that specific person. Enforce PCI DSS credit card security standards. Selecting this feature enforces the use of 7-character strong passwords that must be changed every 90 days. If you want to have your password changed every 90 days and you want it to be a strong password, then check this box. Auto refresh local data. SiteLink is going to look at any potential changes that have happened with another computer that you have at your facility, or if a payment comes online, it's going to look for that data periodically. This number references how often it's going to choose or look for that change, typically you're going to have this between 4 to 10 minutes, 4 being the minimum. Storage form, we have a storage form website which is located at storageform.sitelink.com. If you do not want certain employees to have access to that form, you can disable that screen. For example, if you have site manager, you need to be a site manager or higher to access the form. If you were quote unquote below a site manager, which would be user, part-timer, special, or driver, you could not see that or use that button. The next tab is proration. You're either going to be typically first of the month or anniversary date billing. Choose whatever your default is so that you don't have to change it every time you do a move-in. 28-day billing, I've only ever seen this used in Canada, but if you're 28-day billing, which basically creates one extra rent charge a year, then you would choose that as your default. If you're first of the month billing, you have prorate options. So if someone moved in on the 1st, normally you would charge them a full month's rent. If they moved in on the 2nd, you'd prorate them. At some point, typically you would decide that you would prorate and charge next month's rent. For example, if someone moved in on the last day of the month, most facilities would not just charge 1 day worth of rent. They would charge a day's worth of rent and next month. Decide what that time period is for you. So for example, the 15th, so you could say from the 2nd to the 14th, we're going to prorate the rent. The 15th onwards, we're going to prorate and charge next month's rent. That would be a typical proration schedule. Some people do until the 19th, and then on the 20th, you prorate and charge next month's rent. The second month prorate would be that you charge a full month up front, and then you prorate the second month. You get more money up front. Paid through data, typically your default would be changed for full payments on rent, but we do have an option to change for partial rent payments. In other words, if someone was due on the 1st of the month and they paid you half the amount for the rent, normally, if you have this chosen to change for full payments on rent, the paid through date would not change. But if you have the second option chosen to change for partial rent payments, it would move the paid through date halfway. First of the month billing, typically you're going to prorate by month, meaning if you're in a 30-day month, you'll prorate by 30 days. If you're in a 31-day month, you'd prorate by 31 days. But we do have an option to prorate by 30-day periods. And then with 28-day billing, you could either prorate by 28 days or prorate by 7 days weekly. Move-in. For consistency purposes, with reporting, I typically tell people to require the tenant to be moved in on today's date. With that being said, we do allow option to require the tenants to be moved in on today or future dates, or allow tenants to be moved in on any past or future date. Recognize that when you do have backdating, you're going to change reports historically. Concessions. Concessions is another way to say credit. If you check allow setting rent below the standard rate, you can do just that. You can arbitrarily change the rent on a move-in. So for example, if someone says that the rent at a facility down the road is cheaper, you could match that rate. Allow setting user-defined recurring charges below the standard rates. What is a user-defined recurring charge? A user-defined recurring charge is a charge that is other than rent that goes on the account every month. That could be an electricity fee. That could be a water fee. Some people rent blankets. SiteLink will allow you to have up to 8 recurring charges. And lastly, we have require only using predefined concession plans. If this is checked, you could only choose from your discount plans. For example, military, senior, pay 6 months, get the 7th month free. You could not arbitrarily change someone's rent. Miscellaneous move-in, default to send invoices to new tenants. So if you find yourself checking the invoice button every time you move someone in, you don't have to. You can click default to send it to new tenants. Require marketing data. I personally like this option. I think it's very important to know how the people are finding out about you. If you want to do that, you can check requiring marketing data, and you will have to answer that when moving someone in. Charge the default administrative fee at move-in. If you charge someone a fee automatically when they move in, then check that option. And then prompt to print lease. If you want it to ask you to print the lease on move-in, check that. Document delivery. I see a lot of facilities that are really pushing sending email as opposed to other delivery methods. If you want to have that as a choice, check email. Move out. Again, similar to move-in, I would suggest that you require the tenant to be moved out on today's date for consistency with reporting purposes. At the same time, there are other options. Require the tenant to be moved out on today or future dates. Require the tenant to be moved out on today's or past dates. And then lastly, allow tenants to be moved out on any past or future date with a maximum days backdating as a choice. In other words, some facilities will allow you to backdate for 3 days. So if someone moved out on the weekend without telling you, you could allow for a minimum of 3 days of backdating, and then after that, there is no more backdating. That limits reports changing historically. And then I would also suggest that if you had your maximum days backdating as 2 or 3, that you do not view or process your month-end reports until after that time period has passed. Miscellaneous move-out. Disable move-out proration X amount of days after the start of the billing period. So you may allow for prorating rent on move-out for, let's say, 5 days. But if you set it to disable at 0 days, it will gray out that option entirely. Prompt to print the tenant's ledger history and notes. If you want to have a hard copy of their notes and ledger history, you can choose that for move out. Allow writing off bad debts at move out. When someone moves out, if they owe you money, that's considered bad debt. Some facilities let that accumulate. If you want to handle writing off bad debts at move out because you, as a rule, determine that you're not going to get paid typically when someone moves out that owes you money, then you can check that option. If not, it will wait till the end of the month for you to write it off. Prompt to change and reuse gate access code. Every tenant is assigned a gate access code. When they move out, they no longer have access to that unit or that gate. They can't use that gate code any longer. However, that gate code by default is assigned to that person. The reason being, if they moved in again, let's say a year later, you could give them that same gate code again. The problem is, if you have a gate code set up that is 4 or 5 digits, after using SiteLink for some time, you may find that when you move new people in, it says that code is already in use. It's not used by an existing customer, it's associated to a previous tenant. To work around that, you can click the button to prompt to change and reuse gate access code. So when you move someone out, you can randomize their code so their original code is available for a new tenant that moves in. Require exit survey data. This is the inverse of the marketing. So when someone moves out, you can ask them why they're leaving, and that's tracked in SiteLink. For transfer, charge the default transfer fee when transferring from one unit to another. So if you charge a fee on a transfer, you'd want to check that option. Invoice. How many days prior to the rent being due would you want it to prompt to invoice? Typically, I would see 15 or 20 days, but I'm also starting to see customers doing earlier on, 5 days before, as they feel that it is very close to the rental period and people won't forget to pay. Ultimately, it's up to you what you choose here. Charge the default invoice fee when processing invoices. You can have a fee associated with an invoice when you process it, if that's a dollar fee, for example. If you want a location code to appear on the invoice, then type in that code here. What is your remittance address? Where do you want the invoice to be sent when it's paid? You can click to use the site address. Unpaid charges selection. Include unpaid charges for all billing periods, or include unpaid charges for past and current billing periods. Typically, customers would have include unpaid charges for all periods. In other words, what do they owe in the past, what do they currently owe, and what are they going to owe in the next billing period. You also have an option to include unpaid charges for past and current billing periods, but not future periods. For the format, most customers choose the detailed invoice all unpaid charges, which will show line by line entries for every single charge that's on someone's account. Depending on how many charges they have on their account, potentially your invoice could be more than one page. If you want to force it to be one page, you can click the one page invoice. Know that it will summarize data. It will show your total rent, your total late fees. It will not have it line by line. And then detailed invoice, only charges that have not been previously invoiced is the last setting. For payment types, you see the different default payment types that are here, and you can choose whether or not they're allowed. Could they be reversed? So typical reversals would be checks and credit cards, and then if it can be taken online. Obviously, you would not take an online for a cash payment. So you decide for each one, is it used or not, and what the name of it is. For example, you might not take Discover Card. If that's the case, then you choose don't allow this payment type, click on save. If there's a payment method here that you don't use but you want to use a different method, then you could change the name. So for example, you might not use money order, but you might take PayPal. You could take money order, highlight it, and then change the description to PayPal and click save. This does not mean that this is a direct integration to PayPal. You'd still be taking payments through PayPal within its own system, but you could show that a payment was taken outside of SiteLink by choosing the payment type that's now called PayPal. Payments, receipt printing, typically people would have prompt before printing, but you can have always print receipt or never print receipt. Receipt emailing, you can do prompt before emailing, always email receipt, never email receipt. Order of payments, typically facilities would have oldest first, which would pay in the order of rent, late fee, rent, late fee. But some facilities have chosen rent before fees or fees before rent, or some states dictate that it needs to be that way. Ledger format, typically you have the standard ledger. That's our default way of looking at the ledger history report, which is probably the most popular report for a tenant. But we do have a different view called simple ledger, so you can toggle between the two to see which view that you prefer. Miscellaneous items, if the tenant has a credit card number on record, show it when taking a credit card payment. So if you have someone that may pay with cash one time, credit card another time, they're not on auto bill, but they may want to use their credit card, you can have their credit card on file. This is what this option allows. Prompt to print a partial payment reminder letter when taking a payment that leaves rent balance due. So if you don't pay your full rent, it will come up with this checked to print the notice that states that they have not fully paid off their rent. Prompt to disable past due event handling when taking a payment that leaves a rent balance due. The situation would be someone's due on the first of the month and they say, is it okay if I pay half the month's rent and move out halfway through the month? If you said yes, if they didn't pay half the month's rent, they would be charged a late fee at a certain point in time or locked out of the gate. Because in this scenario you've made a deal with them and you're okay with moving out throughout the month, you'd want to disable the past due event handling so they're not charged late fees or not locked out of the gate. Many facilities, they'll let you pay half the month, but you still owe for the full month no matter when you move out. If that's the case, then this option would not be for you. Permit backdated charges when manually adding a new one. I would not recommend this setting, again, for the fact that when you backdate items, you affect historical reports. Nonetheless, that is an option that you can choose. Prompt to save auto bill information when taking a credit card payment. So it's always a good option to put people on auto bill for many reasons, but specifically they stay longer, there's less people that are past due. When you take a credit card payment, if you want to be prompted to put them to auto bill, then check this setting. Disable partial rent payments when account is this many days past due. For many facilities, they don't want to take partial payments, so you could put that number to be 1 and you'd always have to take a full payment. Or for some facilities, they might wait until someone's a month due, then they must pay the full month's rent. Then you'd put 30 in that case. If you don't want to have the disable partial rent payments, then leave that as 0. Reset past due events when partial rent payment brings account within this many days past due. If you have some tenants that tend to always be 1 month late, they owe for January, they pay for January and February. They now owe for February, they pay for February and March. They're always 1 month behind. If that's the case, the first month that they're late, SiteLink would charge a late fee, but if they never fully pay up, if they never get back to 0, it's not going to charge that late fee again because the past due event was not reset. So you can put this number to be, let's say 3 or 4, and if they become that many days past due, it will reset the past due event, so those late fees will go on. Credits. We have some defaults for credits. The first one being a maximum allowed credits per period. So if you as an owner want to give the manager some leeway in terms of how many credits they could give for a month, but after they hit that certain target, they must reach out to you, or you or someone else will need to process the credits. You can put in that value. Let's say that value is $200 for the period of the current month. Once they put in $200 worth of credits, they can no longer put in credits, and you or an administrator, someone with a higher level, will need to put in that credit. And you set what that security level needs to be. So you need to be, let's say, an area manager or higher. So therefore, a manager would have this restriction. The area manager or someone of that level or higher would not have that restriction. The reset period, typically customers choose current month, but you can have previous 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and never reset. Employee restrictions on issuing credits. If you set this up for $20 in this case and your late fee was $10, this would allow a given tenant to have 2 late fees of $10 credited on their account. Once they reach the $20 in this instance, they can no longer receive any credits. It's not that the manager's not a nice person. It's not that the manager won't allow the credits. It's that the system won't let them do it. So some people find that helps control that situation a little bit from the awkwardness that the manager saying no to the customer in terms of a credit. Discount restrictions. Maximum allowed percentage of discount. So if you have a certain percentage of discount that you'd potentially allow, put that value in here, and then again you can have a security level or higher that you choose for this option. Refunds. If you have a maximum amount of days for merchandise refunds, you can set that here. Let's say it's 30. You can have a minimum allowed refund payment and a maximum allowed refund payment, and then again a security level or higher to pay refunds. Daily close. We suggest that managers close the day every day. With that being said, we have an automatic daily close function. The automatic daily close function is not meant to supersede the manager making a close. It's meant to be used in addition to their regular close. So for example, manager closes the day at 5 o'clock and verifies that the payment that came in is correct. They close the day. The typical scenario with why you'd use this is if you're taking online payments. The manager now goes home, a payment or payments come in, let's say at 10 o'clock at night. The manager's not there to close it. What would happen is that payment or payments would show on today's receipts, but they would then show on the following day's close, which for some people would cause challenges for reconciling. If you have the option to always perform an automatic daily close at midnight, $0 close will be made if no payments exist. This will close those payments that came in online, so therefore you can be confident that your receipts match your deposits. And that really helps with reconciling. So if you're having any issues with reconciling, I would strongly consider this. The next option is perform an automatic daily close only when payments are made between midnight and the previous close. I personally like this option to always perform it, because if you choose the third option to only close when payments come in, sometimes it can be confusing. Did SiteLink not close because we didn't have any payments, or did SiteLink not close because there was a problem? So if you have it set to always perform an automatic daily close, 0 if there's no payments, you can be rest assured that there was a close regardless of the situation. Miscellaneous. Require entering walk-ins and other leads before making a daily close. That's a choice. Late fees. Normally you would have late fees. Use settings under charge setup, but we do have an option to conform to the California late fee schedule. You would only use this option if you were in California and it has set criteria that you owe a certain amount of late fee if you owe under this amount, and then it moves into a percentage. There's a specific calculation based solely for California. Late fee constraints, similar to the constraint with the gate lockout, you can have a minimum past due balance before a late fee is applied. And set up late fees unit by unit from the modify unit screen. If you have this checked, first you need to ask yourself, are our late fees the same for all tenants? Yes or no? If they are the same for all tenants, don't check this. But if you happen to have a unit or units that are different from the norm, maybe you have one very large unit that has much higher late fee, you could check this and then set up the late fee unit by unit. Printing in reports, typically you would leave these settings the same, but we have options to change the default font, which paper size you use. Some facilities have their year representing a different time period, so they don't have January 1st to December 31st. Their year might end in September, for example. You have an option to have the fiscal year reporting in. You have an option for your fiscal year reporting starting in a given month, and then also when you have custom start and end dates, default to a monthly period ending on the X date. Start of day printing automation. Do not use printing automation or prompt to print all letters and reports at startup. If you have the prompt, it will ask you, would you like to print your start of day reports? And you define what those reports are. Do you want automatic invoices to be printed? Do you want certain reports to be printed automatically? That's where this comes into play. With SMS or text messages, you can have predefined text messages that you create here. For international, this is used solely for customers that are not in the United States. For example, using unformatted social security numbers, show areas instead of width and length, and use meters instead of feet. For taxation, typically you're going to be exclusive tax. In other words, if your rent's $100 and your tax rate's 7, your rent is 100. The total is 107 after tax. 100 rent, 7% tax. But you're quoting the rent as 100, and we all know that there will be tax added to that. Whereas inclusive tax, you're quoting the rent with tax. So someone says, what is the rent? And this, we see this in Australia, they will say 107, but 7 of that is the tax. This needs to be set up from our programming staff. This is not an option that you can arbitrarily choose. The default will be exclusive. Inventory transfers, if you're receiving inventory potentially from another one of your facilities, add your facilities here. And then when you go into our merchandise setup screen, you have the option to choose a facility when increasing your inventory. User responses 1. If you find yourself giving the same answers for when you put in a credit or when you put in a note for a call, you can add those reasons here and they can be chosen from a drop down when you perform that particular task. Same thing with user responses 2. If you make a unit complementary, meaning you make the unit rent 0, or if you have a change to units, typically maintenance related, you can have predefined reasons that can be chosen from a drop down. Activity logging, we have a lot of different options that you can check to force someone to put in a reason when they perform a certain activity. I typically recommend that customers check all these options, and then if for some reason managers say that they don't want to put in a reason for a given task, you could uncheck what that task is. It's very important to have reasons for when you manually discount a charge, when you manually issue a credit. Reservations, default number of days after date placed when reservations expire, default number of days for a follow-up to a new lead, and then default number of days for subsequent follow-ups. So in this case, once you have a reservation expire, it would keep it on the list for 10 days. Once you put someone in as a lead, it's going to tell you after 3 days to follow up with them, and then in this scenario, 3 days after that and 3 days after that, and continuing on, it'll tell you to follow up. Apply reservation fee to converted move-in by default. So if you are a facility that has a reservation fee, you're usually going to be one of 2 scenarios. Either A, that reservation fee is more of an admin fee and you keep that money when they move in, or B, you're going to apply that reservation fee to their account when they move in. If you are the latter and you apply the reservation fee when they move in, then I would suggest automatically checking this rather than you having to arbitrarily check that on move-in and you might forget. So by this being checked, it will automatically apply that reservation fee at move-in. Attributes on website. We have different ways that we classify units. Typically, it would be the unit number or a unit type. You can have other attributes that you can add or edit in this screen to show your websites, to show your units may be handicap accessible, it may have air conditioning, and so on. IP restrictions, if you want to restrict, you may limit access to specific IP addresses. Normally, you wouldn't set this up, but if you're very specific in terms of your network and IP address configuration, then you can look at this screen.